Hello and welcome to EnglishVibesHub, the ultimate destination for improving your English conversation skills. I'm your host, Emma, and I'm excited to be here today with my co-host, Liam. Today, we're going to dive into a fascinating topic that will help you navigate everyday conversations with ease and confidence. We're talking about transitional phrases and discourse markers.
That's right, Emma. Transitional phrases and discourse markers are essential tools for connecting your ideas, signaling shifts in your conversation, and making your speech sound more natural and cohesive. I'm really looking forward to exploring this topic with you and our audience. Let's start with the basics. What are transitional phrases, and how do we use them in everyday conversations?
Well, Liam, transitional phrases are words or phrases that help us link our ideas together, making our speech flow smoothly from one point to another. For example, we use phrases like however, in addition, or meanwhile to connect our thoughts and show how they relate to each other. Let's take the phrase however as an example. We can use it to contrast two ideas, like I love playing soccer, however, I'm not very good at it yet.
That's a great example, Emma. Using however in that sentence helps to show that the two ideas are contrasting, and it makes the sentence flow better. Another phrase that's commonly used is in addition. We can use it to add more information to a point we're making, like I love reading books, and in addition to that, I also enjoy writing short stories. It's a great way to expand on our ideas and provide more details.
Exactly, and let's not forget about meanwhile. We can use it to show that two things are happening at the same time, like I was studying for my exam, meanwhile, my friends were watching a movie. It's a great way to describe simultaneous events and make our conversations more engaging. Now, let's talk about some phrasal verbs and idioms that can help us navigate everyday conversations. Have you ever heard of the phrase pick up on something?
Yes, I have. Pick up on something means to notice or become aware of something, often subtly. For example, I picked up on the fact that she was tired, so I offered to drive her home. It's a really useful phrase for describing those moments when we notice something that others might not have caught, and it's a great example of how phrasal verbs can add flavor to our conversations.
That's right. Phrasal verbs like pick up on something can add a lot of nuance to our language and help us express ourselves more precisely. Another phrasal verb that's commonly used is get around to something. It means to finally do something that you have been putting off or delaying, like I've been meaning to call my mom, but I haven't gotten around to it yet.
I love that phrase. Get around to something is so useful for describing those times when we procrastinate or put things off. And it's a great way to show that we're aware of our own delays and are taking steps to address them. Let's talk about another idiom that's related to this idea. Have you ever heard of the phrase put something off until the last minute?
Yes, I have. Put something off until the last minute means to delay doing something until it's almost too late. Like I put off my homework until the last minute, and now I'm rushed to finish it. It's a great phrase for describing those moments when we procrastinate and then have to scramble to get things done. And it's a good reminder to prioritize our tasks and manage our time more effectively.
That's so true, Emma. Procrastination can be a major obstacle to productivity, and using phrases like put something off until the last minute can help us acknowledge and address this behavior. Now, let's talk about the idiom take something with a grain of salt. It means to be skeptical or cautious, and not to take something at face value, like I took the rumor with a grain of salt, and I didn't believe it until I saw the evidence.
I love that idiom. Take something with a grain of salt is such a useful phrase for describing those times when we need to be cautious or skeptical. And it's a great way to show that we're thinking critically and not just accepting things at face value. It's also a good reminder to verify information and seek out multiple sources before making a decision or forming an opinion.
Absolutely, critical thinking is so important in everyday conversations, and using idioms like take something with a grain of salt can help us express our skepticism and caution in a more nuanced way. Now, let's talk about how we can use these phrases and idioms in our everyday conversations. Do you have any tips for our listeners, Emma?
Well, Liam, I think one of the most important things is to practice using these phrases and idioms in context. Try to use them in your own conversations and see how they sound. You can also listen to native speakers and notice how they use transitional phrases and discourse markers. And don't be afraid to make mistakes the more you practice. The more natural it will become.
That's great advice, Emma. And I think it's also important to remember that language is all about communication, so don't be afraid to ask for clarification or explanation if you're not sure what someone means. Using phrases like, "Can you explain that again?" or "What do you mean by that?" can help to avoid misunderstandings and ensure that we're on the same page.
Exactly. Asking for clarification is such an important part of effective communication, and it's something that we should all practice in our everyday conversations. Now, let's take a closer look at some more examples of transitional phrases and discourse markers. We can use phrases like "on the one hand" and "on the other hand" to show contrasting ideas, like "I love the new restaurant. On the one hand, the food is amazing, but on the other hand, the service is slow."
That's a great example, Emma. Using "on the one hand" and "on the other hand" can help us present a balanced view and show that we're considering multiple perspectives. And it's a great way to add nuance to our conversations and make them more engaging. Let's explore some more examples and see how we can use these phrases in different contexts.
Sounds like a plan, Liam. Let's dive deeper into the world of transitional phrases and discourse markers and see how we can use them to take our conversations to the next level. We'll be back with more examples and tips after this break, so stay tuned.
And we'll also be discussing some common mistakes that people make when using transitional phrases and discourse markers and how we can avoid them. It's going to be a really informative and helpful conversation, so let's keep going and see where it takes us.
I'm excited to explore this topic further and share some more tips and examples with our listeners. Let's get back to it and see how we can use transitional phrases and discourse markers to improve our everyday conversations.
Absolutely, Emma. And I think it's also important to remember that language is constantly evolving, so we should always be looking for new ways to express ourselves and improve our communication skills. Let's keep the conversation going and see where it takes us.
That's a great point, Liam. And I think it's also worth noting that using transitional phrases and discourse markers can help us to sound more natural and fluent in our conversations. It's all about finding the right balance and using the right phrases at the right time.
Exactly, finding the right balance is key, and it's something that we should all strive for in our everyday conversations. Let's keep exploring this topic and see how we can use transitional phrases and discourse markers to improve our communication skills.
I'm excited to continue this conversation and share some more tips and examples with our listeners. Let's keep going and see where it takes us.
And I think it's also important to remember that practice is key when it comes to using transitional phrases and discourse markers. The more we practice, the more natural it will become, and the better we'll be at communicating effectively.
That's so true, Liam. Practice is essential for improving our language skills, and it's something that we should all prioritize. Let's keep practicing and see how we can use transitional phrases and discourse markers to take our conversations to the next level.
I'm looking forward to continuing this conversation and exploring more examples of transitional phrases and discourse markers. Let's keep going and see where it takes us.
Me too, Liam. I think we're just getting started, and there's so much more to discuss. Let's keep the conversation going and see how we can use transitional phrases and discourse markers to improve our everyday conversations.
Absolutely, Emma. And I think it's also worth noting that using transitional phrases and discourse markers can help us to build stronger relationships with others. When we communicate effectively, we're more likely to build trust and understanding, and that's essential for any successful relationship.
That's a great point, Liam. Building strong relationships is all about communication, and using transitional phrases and discourse markers can help us to do just that. Let's keep exploring this topic and see how we can use language to build stronger connections with others.
I'm excited to continue this conversation and see where it takes us. Let's keep going and explore more examples of transitional phrases and discourse markers. I'd love to dive deeper into this topic. Emma, can you think of a time when you had to use transitional phrases to change the direction of a conversation?
Actually, yes. I was at a dinner party last weekend, and the conversation started to get a bit heated about politics. So, I used the phrase on a lighter note to shift the conversation towards a more enjoyable topic.
That's a great example. On a lighter note is a fantastic transitional phrase to use in situations like that. It's like a breath of fresh air, you know.
Exactly. And it's also important to know when to use phrases like "by the way" or "incidentally" to add additional information to the conversation without interrupting the other person.
I see what you mean. It's all about being mindful of the flow of the conversation and using the right discourse markers to keep it going smoothly. Let's do a role play to practice using some of these phrases in a natural way.
Sounds like a plan. Okay, so let's say we're at a coffee shop and we're discussing our plans for the weekend. I'll start. Hey Liam, have you made any plans for Saturday? I was thinking of going to the park for a picnic.
That sounds like fun. I was actually thinking of going to the museum to check out the new exhibit. By the way, have you been to the museum recently?
Not recently, but I've been meaning to go. Incidentally, I heard the new exhibit is really interesting. Maybe we could meet up there on Sunday instead.
That's a great idea. On a related note, have you heard about the new cafe that just opened up near the museum? I've been wanting to try it out.
No, I haven't. But that sounds like a perfect spot to grab lunch before or after the museum. Speaking of which, let's use the phrase to get back to the point to refocus our conversation.
Ha, good one. To get back to the point, shall we make a plan to meet up at the museum on Sunday and then grab lunch at the new cafe?
Sounds like a plan to me. And let's not forget to use phrases like meanwhile or in the meantime to talk about what we'll be doing before we meet up on Sunday.
Exactly. Meanwhile, I'll be working on a project, and in the meantime, you can be preparing for your picnic on Saturday.
That's right. And we can use the phrase to sum it up to recap our plans for the weekend.
To sum it up, we're meeting up at the museum on Sunday, and before that, you'll be going to the park for a picnic on Saturday. Got it.
Got it. And let's explain a few more phrasal verbs that might be useful in everyday conversations. What about to pick up or to drop off?
Great choices. To pick up can mean to collect something or someone, like I'll pick you up from the station at 5 p.m. And to drop off can mean to leave something or someone at a location, like I'll drop off the package at the post office.
Exactly. And what about to turn down or to put off? Can you think of situations where you would use those phrases?
Yes, definitely. To turn down can mean to reject an offer or invitation, like I turned down the job offer because it wasn't a good fit. And to put off can mean to delay or postpone something, like I put off my homework until the last minute, and now I'm in trouble.
That's right. And let's not forget about to get around or to bring up. Can you think of examples for those phrases?
For to get around, I can think of a situation where you're trying to avoid talking about something, like I tried to get around the question, but she caught on. And for to bring up, it can mean to mention or introduce a topic, like I brought up the idea of a team-building event, and everyone seemed interested.
Great examples, Liam. I think we've covered a lot of useful phrases and discourse markers so far. Let's keep the conversation going and see where it takes us next.
I'm excited to explore more topics and share more stories. Maybe we can talk about a time when we had to use our language skills to navigate a difficult conversation.
That's a great idea. I have a story about a time when I had to use my language skills to resolve a conflict with a colleague. It was a really challenging situation, but I learned a lot from it.
I'd love to hear more about that story. Can you tell us what happened and how you managed to resolve the conflict?
So, Liam, I think our listener's story really highlights the importance of using transitional phrases and discourse markers in everyday conversations. It helps to create a clear narrative and keeps the listener engaged.
Absolutely, Emma. And I think it's also worth noting that using phrases like however and in addition can really help to add depth and complexity to our conversations. They signal to the listener that we're about to add a new idea or contrast with what we've just said.
That's a great point, Liam. And speaking of adding new ideas, let's talk about the phrasal verb to bring up. This means to introduce a new topic or idea into a conversation. For example, I wanted to bring up the idea of having a team meeting to discuss the project.
I love that example, Emma, and it reminds me of the idiom to touch base. This means to briefly talk to someone or check in with them, often to discuss something specific. For instance, I'll touch base with the client tomorrow to see how the project is going.
Exactly, Liam. And another useful phrasal verb is to follow up. This means to check on the progress of something or to contact someone again after an initial conversation. For example, I'll follow up with the contractor next week to see if the work is finished.
That's really helpful, Emma. And finally, let's talk about the idiom to get to the point. This means to stop talking about unnecessary details and focus on the main idea or message. For instance, can you get to the point and tell me what you really want?
I think these phrases and idioms are all really useful for improving our everyday conversations. Liam. And I hope our listeners have found this episode helpful in learning how to use transitional phrases and discourse markers effectively.
Definitely, Emma. And I think it's also worth reminding our listeners that practice is key. The more they practice using these phrases and idioms in their own conversations, the more natural it will become.
So, to wrap up, let's summarize some of the key takeaways from this episode. We've talked about the importance of using transitional phrases and discourse markers, and we've covered some useful phrasal verbs and idioms like to bring up, to touch base, to follow up, and to get to the point.
That's right, Emma. And I think our listeners will find that using these phrases and idioms will really help them to navigate everyday conversations with confidence and clarity.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today, Liam. It's been a great conversation, and I'm so glad we could share these tips and examples with our listeners.
Me too, Emma. And I'm sure our listeners will tune in again soon for more helpful tips and conversations on English Vibes Hub.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of English Vibes Hub, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed our conversation and learned some new phrases and idioms to help you navigate everyday conversations.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more episodes like this one, and we'll catch you in the next one. Tune in for more English language lessons and conversations on English Vibes Hub.